Okay, so welcome to the latest in the Press Pass series here on the podcast, and with me is a familiar face, Mr. Kris Temple. Kris, how are you?
I'm good, Sam. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, I would shake your hand, but I don't know if it's allowed these days
I think we're
with
banned.
everything that's going on. But how are things with you anyway? Right?
Yeah, really good. Yeah, first of all, it's always nice when the sun's shining. It makes such a difference, doesn't it? But yeah, I mean, this stage of the season, it's all getting a bit interesting, isn't it? And I think after last week's performance against Chelsea, hopefully that's just instilled a little bit of belief that with players back now, it's maybe starting to come together a little bit.
Yeah. So people who've seen you and heard you will know you from BBC Radio Solent, obviously doing the stuff at AFCB TV every now and again, also on BBC South Today. But in the last few years, it seems you've gone a completely different direction. You're travelling the world doing all sorts. So can you tell me a bit about what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, so 2018 summer I went freelance from the BBC. So I do Bournemouth now as a freelance gig a couple of days a week. So as we're speaking here, I've just done Eddie's press conference on a Friday morning, which is a regular gig, and then Saturday matches as well. And then the rest of the time is a lot of varied stuff, a lot of event work. So for example, this summer I'm doing the Euros at Wembley. Obviously, I'm now the England announcer for Wembley as well, which is great. Doing the Olympics, so just a lot of varied event stuff really. A lot of stuff I wasn't able to do when I was BBC staff for sort of contractual reasons, and B, because I didn't have enough time. It's freelance life, as anyone will tell you, is up and down, to say the least. January was a bit quiet because when nothing's happening, but that's where the football's great, because obviously the winter is very busy from a football point of view. So it's a really good mix, and I don't have any regrets at the moment about making the freelance jump.
Well, I did that in 2016. I mean, I'm a web developer, and quite often I use services off Fiverr, and I was on there the other day, a cheeky little Kris Temple on there. You're doing voiceovers as well. There's a link at christemple.com at the top if you go to there. But also a lot of voiceover work as well. Yeah,
so I set up a little studio at home actually, just to be, and through the winter that's quite a regular source of income for me when it's a bit quiet. So I think I counted out the other day, I've done something like 25 countries worth of voiceovers for people in Lithuania and Madagascar and all these amazing places where you just record it at home and send it off down the line. So it's another little sort of sideline I've started to develop that I couldn't do when I was BBC staff.
Maybe you've done Italy, I don't know, but obviously in Italy at the moment everything's on lockdown and it seems to be spreading, hopefully not the virus, but no handshakes this weekend in the Premier League, as we alluded to. What's your opinion on that? Because how are players going to celebrate? Are they not going to touch each other?
Well,
it's a bit of an odd one.
I think obviously people have got to be seen to be doing things and seen to be doing the right thing half the time, which can actually, sometimes common sense doesn't quite come into it. But certainly the football clubs I've been to, I was at Brighton yesterday and I'm here at Bournemouth today, and there have been measures taken by both clubs in terms of, declaring things on forms as you arrive, which is the first time we've had that. There's a lot of hand sanitizer around. But I mean, the only thing I'll always say is I don't think the mascot should ever be involved in the player handshakes anyway. So I think if maybe we could use this as a vehicle they can walk along, that's lovely, but I don't think we need to see all the mascots shaking all the hands.
It's funny, I was watching the She Believes Cup last night. England lost to USA and they were doing a sort of arm arm gesture to each other. So
just looks stupid.
It does, and apparently they are still going to walk past each other. So is it going to be a knowing nod or something? I don't know.
A nod?
It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. So that's one of the sort of recent controversies that we've had. VAR is another one of them, not least Burnley. We've had a few questions that people want to ask you about it. I mean, what's your overall opinion about how VAR's been implemented this season?
I think we all knew it was going to have teething problems, didn't we? I think we all knew it was going to be sort of an evolutionary thing, that they were going to make a couple of tweaks. The one that I still don't get, and I still, we see it's been a bit more prevalent recently, is the dreaded monitor. I just don't understand why it's still not being used. I mean, the Burnley one was a classic really, where if you're not sure, and let's face it, they were borderline decisions that people could argue till the cows come home whether it was right or wrong, arm or shoulder or whatever. There's no reason that the referee on the field, having not given it, shouldn't just go over and double check it on the monitor and say he's happy with his original decision. That was a classic case of there was no need for the VAR to get involved there, apart from to say you might want to have another look. There's the monitor, which we haven't even turned the power on. So I see the monitor here, over at the far side by the east stand. It's not even come up off its ground level position. So that's my biggest gripe with VAR still, is leave the power on the field. particularly when there are borderlines. Offside, yes. I know it's annoying for people that it's a bootlace or whatever, but there has to be a line somewhere. Yeah. And I'm not a fan of the daylight suggestion. Willow, I know my co-commentator, is a big fan of the daylight suggestion, which is surprising given he's a centre half. I thought he would think anything offside should be offside, but my biggest gripe is the monitor. I really wish they would use it more and let the referee on the day, who's in the emotion of the game, make the decision.
There's a lot of criticism of VAR from fans and supporters alike. In the media, say you're watching, Sky Sports or BT, as rights holders, and they obviously have a direct relationship with the Premier League, is there maybe a reason not to be as critical? I mean, would the Premier League like seeing that kind of criticism of VAR from their perspective?
I think there's a murky line between being a rights holder and having to do the right thing. I think the Premier League would expect media to be forthright and to be honest, and in the way that actually gets people talking about the Premier League more if people are honest with their opinions. So I don't think any media outlet is under any pressure whatsoever to not be editorially independent. Let's not forget the Premier League aren't really the ones deciding VAR. A lot of it comes from IFAB anyway. The Premier League obviously make their local sort of interventions, but certainly no media are going to be either overcritical or not so critical because they're partners of the Premier League. I don't think that's an issue really.
Yeah. And regarding the questioning, obviously you've got a role that's very close to the club. You commentate on every game for Radio Solent, etc. And sometimes, as I said earlier, doing bits for the club as well. I've seen previously, not so much this season, but a lot of journalists have maybe come under a bit of pressure from fans to ask certain questions, to the management. I remember when Lewis Cook wasn't playing for quite a while, there were a lot of fans saying, why don't you ask this? Is it very difficult to ask questions that maybe don't want to be answered?
I would say we're in a slightly different position to Match of the Day and Sky Sports and people. As a local media outlet who come into the club every single week, you're having to see the same people every single week. You can't go in all guns blazing because they'll just say we don't want to talk to you, which is counterproductive. That's not to say you don't have editorial justification at times to ask certain things. What I won't do is every single week ask Eddie why didn't you play him or didn't play him, because you do that every week, and every week he'll just say, he'll get frustrated by saying, what I've seen on the training ground is that I wanted to play him or him, and he's already got frustrated a couple of times when I've asked him why didn't you play X or Y. So the argument is always that the players who aren't in the team, there's always a bigger shout for them being in the team when things aren't going well. But to answer your question, I never feel that I have to pussyfoot around Eddie.
Right, yeah.
I feel like we've sort of managed to gain a respect for each other down the years in terms of he knows what my job is. He knows that there'll be questions that have to come at times. But I also think sometimes the questions that I get battered with on Twitter, why didn't you ask this? You never ask any hard questions. Usually that's the sort of emotional, immediate post-match feeling that people are frustrated by a result or whatever. And most of the time when I go down after the game, I'm still adrenaline high from the game, win, lose or draw. So sometimes there will be things that I've just genuinely missed because in the crux of the game. Sometimes last week my equipment wasn't even set up and Eddie Howe was in front of me because Match of the Day were tied up with somebody else and Sky Sports were tied up, and suddenly I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. So actually you're actually thinking on the hoof there because I've just run downstairs with all my equipment in my arms. So that happens as well. But yeah, again, to surmise your question, I understand why people sometimes want harsher questions to be asked, but it is a sort of a balancing act between maintaining the respect of people who think you're not just coming in, firing a shotgun all the time, that you actually, you understand what they're trying to achieve overall.
Do you find him quite an open manager to talk to? Obviously you speak to a lot of players and sort of managers from from all over. What do you think? Because he seems to be very media trained. He's got a clever way of closing people down with their line of questioning, I find, when I'm watching the press conferences. But what do you think about how open he can get, or do you think he's quite guarded in his answers?
I think he's very clever. I think he's very intelligent. He never wants to give anything that can be, to coin a cliche, pinned on a dressing room wall. He absolutely doesn't want to give any fuel to any fire about that. He's very respectful of other clubs. He's very well liked by other clubs, as far as I can gather. In terms of other managers, always speak very highly of him as a guy to deal with. It's funny, I listened to the Peter Crouch podcast recently with Mike Dean, who named Eddie as one of the best managers to deal with. Win, lose or draw, he'll always make his point. Sort of in a gentlemanly manner, but yeah, he is pretty canny. What I would say is, and this is a conversation I've had with Eddie in the past, away from the sort of day-to-day media, it was a lunch we were with, and he actually made the point that he uses our interview on Radio Solent because he knows that that's often the longer form interview that fans will listen to. It does the rounds on social media. Match of the Day will only use a clip. Sky Sports will only use a clip. Newspapers, obviously, it looks different written on paper than it does when you actually hear the emotion in someone's voice. And he says, I speak a little bit more openly to you guys because I know that fans in the cars are listening to that, and that often I can give a bit more context. So rather than speaking in 15-second answers to Match of the Day. So again, he's savvy like that as well.
Interesting. So we've had a few questions to asked from the great AFC Bournemouth public. Paul Kenwood, a big admirer of yours, as most of us are, in terms of your commentary. Who influenced your style?
Do you know what? I never really planned to become a commentator, so I never really watched anybody as a commentator and thought I really want to do your job. I mean, I know one of your later questions, because you preempted me, you're going to ask this one, is that what is my team? And my team, I'll get it out of the way now, is actually Gillingham, which I know a few people will cringe and go, oh, Gillingham. But the context between answering that and your question is that Brian Moore, the ex-ITV commentator, was somebody at the time I didn't know was a massive Gillingham fan, but he's somebody who I used to love, and even the sound of his voice on YouTube matches now. I wouldn't sound the same as him in any way, but he's the one commentator I really used to love.
Do you think he would have said wowee?
Wowee, Harry Wilson. Again, I mean, that's the...
Harry Wilson, conjure up here. Left-footed! Oh, wow! Wowee, Harry Wilson! Free kicks don't come much better than that!
You often say about... there are some commentators that have stuff ready to go for when a moment happens. And I think, to be honest, that was a prime example of the fact that I don't have anything ready to go. Because you just literally say what comes into your mind. And that was what came into my mind at the time.
I think I said that as well.
Natural reaction. Yeah, exactly. So, in terms of style, the one thing I would say is I never wanted to be John Motson, because he was always... great commentator, quite right at the top for a long time, but was always very sort of statistical based, and that's not really my game. I know other commentators who I've worked with in the past who wanted to be like that and have pages and pages full of statistics. That was never me. I wanted to be a lot more with how the game was flowing at the time and saying what you see, which is your job as a radio commentator. I mean,
have you become a fan? Almost of AFC Bournemouth over the years, because you've had a close relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working here, as you mentioned earlier on, for the best part. I mean, my first game was in 2002.
Wow.
So, I've been covering the club for the best part of 18 years. So I think in that time you do, of course, develop an affinity with the club. A lot of people here are still the same. There's a lot of people who've been here the whole time. Obviously, Eddie was a player back then, so my relationship with him goes back all the way to then as well. I wouldn't say I'm a Bournemouth fan, but what I would say is I do have a connection with the club. And actually, I do, the other day when I wasn't working on a game, I missed the Burnley game, I was working elsewhere, the first score I looked for at 5 o'clock on Saturday was Bournemouth, not Gillingham.
That's interesting. Now, obviously, Willow is a Bournemouth fan, and there are many fans that tune into his commentary either via AFCB TV or on BBC Radio Solent, whereby they think he's a bit of a glass half full character and likes to always give the benefit of the doubt to the players or the club. Is that difficult to combat sometimes when you know he's wrong, but you've got to almost talk him round?
Listen, I've been trying everything to get him off the fence for about 18 years. You would need like some sort of tractor and a massive winch to get him off the fence. It's very difficult. It comes back to the fact that he is, obviously coached Eddie. Eddie still talks to him occasionally, away from the match day sort of experience. So he, you can tell from his commentary. I've had to give him a couple of tickets off recently for shouting down the mic when goals have gone in, which he got out of the habit of doing. But he said, I can't help it. I'm so invested in it, I can't help but get excited. So yeah, sometimes I get frustrated like fans will, and he knows it as well. I've told him, I'll tell him all the way to Liverpool later on today as well on the M6 that sometimes you want a bit more of an opinion from him, but he doesn't want to criticise the lads, which people will say, well, your job is to do that. But again, the job in this kind of role is sort of a bit of everything. It's a bit of the technical insight, it's a bit of a cheerleader, it's a bit of just generally sort of giving an insight into what the players are going through. So yes, you listen to our other summarisers, for example, Dave Merrington on Saints is very forthright. People will say, well, maybe he's got an axe to grind with Saints because of the way things have gone. Guy Whittingham is much more forthright on Portsmouth. So yeah, sometimes I listen to them and think, come on, Willow, give us something a bit more. But then I've told even if he watches this, which he won't because he doesn't know the internet at all, then I would have said it to him in person as well.
Do you think people as a whole find it very difficult to criticise AFC Bournemouth given where we are now compared to, say, 10-15 years ago? Because obviously this is an incredible position. Even now we're in the relegation zone, tied up in a dogfight, we're still in the top flight, somewhere that people never thought we would be. Do you find people almost find it very difficult to criticise based on that alone?
I think people appreciate the story, absolutely, and again, just to give you a bit of media insight, the media find this a very, very good club to deal with.
Yeah.
They really enjoy coming here. The facilities we've got behind us in the press room, the media, everything works. Anthony Marshall and the media team are brilliant to deal with. I'm not just saying that to butter them up so I get an extra interview. They genuinely are, and other people will tell you that. So the media view of Bournemouth has always been good. I think people like dealing with Eddie because even, as you said earlier, sometimes he will shut you down, but never in a way that other managers can shut you down. No. So good to deal with from that point of view. So I think people appreciate the overall story. A couple of things that have happened recently I think probably haven't helped the club's overall PR. I think of sort of the Dan Gosling, John Moss incident, and maybe even Ryan Fraser talking to me. That interview, that was sort of a 50-50 divide on whether that was helpful or not. Ryan Fraser, there's an interview on Football Focus with him this week as well, which they actually asked for a clip of that interview. So I haven't seen the interview, so it's worth watching Saturday lunchtime if you've finished watching this podcast by then. But it's I think the general media view of Bournemouth is a good one. Watford fans and other fans who don't like Bournemouth will tell you differently.
Paul Kenwood, I need to know the context of this. Have you still got the Elvis costume? What was that all about? Was that something you said in commentary?
Yeah.
And was that regarding... No, that wasn't the 3-minute hat-trick.
No,
that wasn't.
It was Eddie coming back from Burnley.
That was it. That was it.
So I said the first answer is yes, I do. And actually, about a month ago, I had a big clear out of my house, and I found that in a white carrier bag, all still packed up clean. It's been in that bag since 2000 and whenever it was, and I went to throw it away, and I was like, no, I need to keep that from memories. So I said there's more chance of Elvis getting appointed as the new manager than Eddie Howe, and if Eddie does come back, I will commentate on his first game dressed as Elvis. And this is, of course, then there were circumstances why he did come back, as we all know. I was a bit unlucky. I still maintain I was a bit unlucky, but I did commentate in the Elvis suit, and that is on the internet somewhere for people to look at.
And I'm sure there was something that you said after the 3-minute James Hayter hat-trick as well. Was it Willow? I can't remember if it was a naked jog around Bournemouth or something along those lines. Might have to revisit that particular clip.
That was a bit more, because that obviously was doing the rounds recently because it was the anniversary, wasn't it, of that game, which was again one of those amazing nights that you never shake off as being involved with Bournemouth, and that's one of those where you benefit from being the only people here covering it. My commentary went everywhere. I was on TV in Australia. Radio 1 played the full 2 minutes 21.
Moyles,
Chris Moyles. So that, again, the benefit of being the only guys here, suddenly your commentary's everywhere. But there was some throwaway naked line in there, but thankfully we didn't do it.
I was about to say, what was it, 2 minutes and...
2:21, wasn't it, officially?
That's right. And earlier in the season, Josh King scored a goal against West Ham that took 2 minutes and 2 seconds to actually get verified on VAR. It shows how not far we've come, I suppose. Right, another question. Who's your favourite AFC Bournemouth player and staffer to work with?
That's a good question. John Williams, no. Well, that's a very good question. I would say the best interviewee, or the sort of guy who's I would say Ryan Fraser's the most honest, actually, in terms of he's the one who sort of hasn't really necessarily thought through particularly much what he's going to say in advance, or doesn't have the go-to sort of short form cliche answers. So I would say from what you get out of him, Ryan Fraser's a great one to deal with. To be honest, the squad are brilliant in terms of, I think the only person who's ever said no to doing an interview is Jermaine Defoe, and I think it was a game he got dragged in, so I'm not surprised. But they'll always do it. Again, when you deal with them regularly, they know your face. If you ask them a bad question or you go down the line they don't like, they'll just say no next time. So that's not to say I don't do that deliberately, but it's to say they'll remember your face and go, I remember that guy, which is not where you want to be.
No, does it sort of favour you as a journalist for you to ask one question and then to almost wax lyrical for 3-4 minutes? Because I noticed after the one of the recent matches, Jose Mourinho actually against after Norwich getting knocked out of the FA Cup, it was Kelly Summers doing some work for the BBC, obviously ex AFCB. She asked Jose one question. And he spoke for about 3.5 minutes non-stop without her having to say anything. Is that a dream scenario for you, or not necessarily?
Often it's an agenda driven, particularly by the managers at the top, because they sometimes know their interviewees only got 4 minutes. So if they speak for 3 of them, that reduces the number of questions they've got to face. Or they've got a monologue they want to get out, everything in their head they want to get it out. I mean, I spoke with Aaron Ramsdale after a recent game for 7 or 8 minutes, and I think I only asked 3 questions in that time. But it was brilliant because he was just pouring out what was in his head. And sometimes you'll think, if they're just droning on or cliche stuff, then you're thinking, oh, come on, give me a break to get in here. But if it is a genuine pouring out of thoughts, then that doesn't hurt us at all. I have sort of fudged my way around your question there. I'm doing the classic dead bat, but I would say in the current squad to deal with, they're all excellent. They really are.
Just got a couple more questions before we wrap up. Patrick Devitt from Chicago, actually, he sent me a question saying, what's the most rewarding part of working with a community-focused club like AFCB?
I think the best, I always say this to people as well who don't come to Bournemouth very often, is the best bit about this club is that it has really not that changed that much since making the Premier League. Everything about the club, a lot of the people in the fabric behind the scenes. I think of other clubs who, when they've got to the Premier League, have gone big time and have you can't do this, you can't do that. Here we still have all the same access. Very, very few clubs have one-on-one interviews with the manager and player pre and post match, which we have still as Radio Solent. So from a media point of view, it's brilliant. But even the size of the ground. It's a negative in one point because there are so many fans who can't get tickets. But it adds to the sort of the romance of it all, really. And I love coming here compared to going to other grounds. There's some of the soulless flat pack stadiums you go to. I think of one not too far down the road from here, I can't think of the name. They're in the sort of lower mid-table somewhere. But but that stadium is pretty soulless. I never went to the Dell, but I imagine that was a bit like this. And the way that hopefully the plans are emerging. A new stadium's going to be great for everything else from the community aspect. But even like down to Steve Cuss and the brilliant work they do in the community afterwards. With the youngsters and the women's team and the disabled team and everything. It's easy to sort of get your hands on every part of this club, which is great, and hopefully the fans enjoy being part of this club as well. Yeah, and the women are going to be playing at Dean Court, I think, end of the season in May sometime. So tickets on sale now. Also, I can't really let you go without talking football and the relegation battle that we've got, and obviously Liverpool coming up tomorrow. What are your thoughts on it? Because there's a team that's on a bad run at the moment, and it's arguably it's not AFC Bournemouth. I think the best thing to take out of Liverpool's recent results is that West Ham, who were completely out of form, went there and gave them a real fright. So obviously the away games are a bit different, playing Atletico Madrid, pretty tough test. Going away to Watford, Watford are hit and miss, as we know. On their day they can be very good. But West Ham went there and gave Liverpool a real fright and obviously led in the second half. So I think that's the performance that can give Bournemouth belief to say that even in front of their own fans, Liverpool can be got at. The cliche, is it a good time to play them? Who knows? They're an unbelievable team. 3 defeats in 4 is probably not what Eddie wanted. It's like dangling a steak in front of a lion, isn't it, really? But what I would say is the recent matches, Sheffield United, Burnley, Bournemouth have played well in parts. Started both games well. Obviously got no points from them, which is the ultimate sort of factor, I guess. But I think the way they played against Chelsea will give them heart going into these games against the Big Six as well. Arguably, a draw was probably fair. Could easily have won. So it doesn't. It holds fear, of course. It does go in there. Bournemouth haven't scored against Liverpool for about 4 years. So I think everyone would bite your hand off for a point now. But I think Palace at home next week is that's bigger, the one, isn't it? Yeah. Well, Kris, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate your thoughts. And in the next video, we'll be outside Anfield doing some fan chats, and fingers crossed it'll be after 3 points. Or you know what? We'll take a point of the Cherries.